what I understand queerness to be. So this is a cartoon character called Garnet from a children's TV show that's, well, a cartoon that's on at the moment called Steven Universe. And Garnet is a character who is the result of two women aliens who fall in love, and they fuse into one awesome black woman with an afro, which is fucking awesome and can see into the future, and who's also down for relationships with other women, which is polyamorous. And this is like on TV, the kids are watching this. So my understanding of queerness is it's something that it challenges, something that critiques, something that undermines dominant understandings of sexuality and gender. And when we think about kids' TV shows, and we think about what kind of characters children are introduced to in terms of female and femme characters, they're not usually like polyamorous black lesbians who can see into the future. And I think this Garnet kind of like is a perfect visual representation of something that challenges, something that undermines, and something that critiques, and is queer. So just in case people have different understandings of queerness. So one technique that Collectivo, I didn't explain it very well. Collectivo Situazione put together a manifesto called Politicizing Sadness, where they talk about this concept of political sadness, and it really ties into something I would call psychic death, which I explain. And one of the ways that they would say political sadness or psychic death works is this concept, the logic of specialists. So basically, if you don't know about politics, don't talk about politics. You haven't studied it. If you haven't read Judith Butler, don't talk about queerness, because you're not a professional, you're not a specialist. If you haven't studied art, then you're not an artist. This idea that like there is people who know how to do things and there's people who don't. This kind of stay in your lane politics. And when I think about that in terms of queerness, this is on the left. There's an illustration I did for a gender anarchy manifesto by an artist called Krishna Ishtar. And Krishna is artists, they're not academic, they're performance artists, and they use their experience of being a non-binary genderqueer person and their skills as like a writer in terms of writing stories and performances, and turned it into a manifesto. And when I think about how queerness is framed in academia, and what queerness is at its core, this ability to critique, and also how I've been introduced. So some context. I'm studying art and politics at the moment. For some reason, I've gone back into academia, and I've noticed that people like bell hooks, who have got a much more accessible way of talking, will often be left off the reading list, even if they are writing about something which is really relevant. It's not just bell hooks. It's got other black academics and people of colour are often kind of additional reading. They're not the core reading. They're kind of extra reading that you can have a look at if you want to. And I think that's really problematic, because when we think about, here bell hooks saying thinking critically is at the heart of anybody transforming their life, like access to a framework of critiquing stuff is kind of going to be most important for people who need to transform their lives the most, which is often the people who are oppressed the most by white supremacy, by capitalism, by heteropatriarchy, by all these things. So in terms of the logic of specialists, I feel like there's these kind of borders which are constantly being put up between who has the authority to talk about something and who doesn't. And someone who's more plain speaking, who speaks in an accessible way, prides herself on working in working class areas and in places where children don't have access to, often to good universities, or like more esteemed universities like bell hooks, is often considered to be less important. And I think it applies to like all disciplines really. This is a quote from Barbie Asante from my zine Fear Brown Quiz, saying, I think the term fine art, it should really be called Western art. And there's this thing that happens in the art world as well, where if you're an artist who has like autism or schizophrenia, or actually if you're just an artist who's not making work to sell, you're making work because you're invested in a kind of process, you're considered an outsider artist. So there's this barrier that's put up. And if you think about the way that fine art functions as a concept, like it is colonial and it does exclude a lot of people. And I've actually forgotten the name of this author, but it's from a book. I just had that written down, but I left my sketchbook with the note that I took that from. It's an old note. But so the thing I included that for was because it was talking about these borders which are violently policed. And the quote at the end, which is, we are who we are to them, even when we don't know who we are to each other, and culture is a record of us fighting, of figuring that out. I feel like, so the zine Fear Brown Queers, it's different people, different snippets of conversations that I've had with people over the last couple of years. And not all of them identify as LGBTQIA, and the reason that they're included, even if they don't identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, is because if you are a black woman, or if you're a black man, or if you're an Asian woman, or if you're an Asian man, your sexuality in a way has already been deemed deviant, because when people talk about black male sexuality, or black female sexuality, or Asian male sexuality, or Asian sexuality, there already are all these kind of weird connotations that come alongside of it in the way that, and when I say weird, I mean in the context of the dominant discourses in our society. When people say sexuality, and if someone was talking about sexuality and they said like a white person's sexuality, often that doesn't really mean anything, but the second you add like a black person's sexuality, all of these kind of colonial racist stereotypes that are constantly being bombarded from our film, from our music, the people who are allowed to progress in music, from everything from Game of Thrones to whatever's on at the cinema at the moment. These racist tropes of black female sexuality, of black male sexuality, of Arab male sexuality are constantly thrown at us, so it starts to taint our understanding of what sexuality is, and people of colour don't have to necessarily go along with that and say, well, just because people see my sexuality as other doesn't necessarily mean I identify as queer, and that's absolutely fine. But what the point I'm making is that there's already these borders that are being policed and already these divisions being put up between us. It's a bit of a tangent from the logic of specialist. So I'm going to try and be really quick because I don't want to take up too much time. So another way that psychic death is implemented is something called the duration as validity criterion. So the idea that if something only lasts a short time, then it doesn't really work. So you could say that about the strike posters that went up kind of calling out racism in the police force, and you could say that about the House of Bragg, which was the London Queer Social Centre that had 4 different incarnations in South London and housed queer self-defense workshops, queer literary salons, discussions led by sex workers, discussions led by poets and activists of loads of different. There was so many different things. There was 4 different buildings. Each one had 2 weeks of workshops that were open to the public, that spanned across the time that Pride festivities were happening, and kind of worked as a kind of counter event to Pride. So you could kind of say that these things didn't really succeed because they were only able to squat the building for 2 weeks, and it's like, well, where is it now? What's happened? So that's another way that political sadness or psychic death is implemented. I'm going to say that. So the first half of this is going to be really sad, because I'm talking about ways that political sadness happens, and then I'm going to talk about ways that to fight it. So this is some of the different incarnations, one here in Kennington, and then also one in Kennington, and the one in the previous picture was in Waterloo, and there's a picture of someone from the House of Bragg, Taha, and a quote that someone said as they're walking past, "I hear that place got turned into some kind of gay den." And then I'm going to try and get through the negative, horrible sadness, psychic deaths as quickly as possible so we can get to the resistance strategies. But contempt for the socialization of production is one that this Argentinian collective pointed out, that dominant powers kind of tend to try and undermine resistance. So one of the methods they use is reactive economicism. So saying that people just care about money. So the junior doctor strike at the moment, a lot of people have been trying to say that they are just in it for money, that they just want more money. But if you actually look at what the doctors are saying, they're definitely talking about healthcare, and they're definitely talking about doing a better job and wanting to look after people and having the support that they need. But this kind of idea that you're just greedy, you're only protesting because you want more money, is something that they call reactive economicism. And then it also kind of fits into the Black Lives Matter movement, because when you think about the word Black Lives Matter, it's a socialization of production, but what it's producing is resistance. So Black Lives Matter is something that anyone can say, anyone can tweet, anyone can write on a piece of paper and hold up in the air and instantly become part of a struggle. But there were so many ways in which it's been shut down. So the picture on the left is a tarot card that I drew for a deck of tarot cards to raise money for cancer research. So I think 54 artists in different countries have all drawn tarot cards, that's my rendition of the Knight of Wands. And in the background it's the cells from Henrietta Lacks, who was a black woman, and cells were taken from her body after she died without her permission, and they were used to create loads of different cancer research treatments that have made millions and millions and millions of pounds, even though her daughter, her children went into care, her daughter died in a mental institution, and her family had never seen any of the millions of pounds that were made from her body. And I mean, it's crazy that you could do it. There's so much to say about Henrietta Lacks. Like, her cells actually went into space before any human went into space, because they kept reproducing outside of her body, and they kept testing on them in different ways. Anyway, so I wanted to make this piece of art about Henrietta Lacks, and I was told by all these artists in different countries, take Black Lives Matter off the moped. They were like, this is about cancer, this is not about black lives. It's like, well, I think Black Lives is kind of relevant to cancer, actually. But they were like, no, it's not. This is about cancer. This is about blah, blah. People just found it were really angry at the term Black Lives Matter, and it made me realise, like, the whole All Lives Matter thing kept coming up. It's this kind of like idea that this, it's a different thing. So what Pletzibo Situazione were talking about with reactive economicism was the capitalism, dominant powers of money, saying you're only, you just want some of our money. Basically, you're not really interested in anything other than money. And I feel like white supremacy operates in a similar way by saying you just want some of our power. And in a way, yeah, but yeah, maybe this is going to be a little bit messy, this talk, because I have lots of things going on at different times. Another one, I think this is the last psychic death, and then we can get on to like resistance, is machines of capture. So when you think about the institutions that already exist, and then you want to be part of them, but then you're like, well, what the fuck is this, So there's Boris Meatface Johnson, irrelevant Johnson, I should say, because he's out now, trying to like hijack, I don't know, the gay politics, LGBT politics, and use it to talk about Brexit. So he's saying like, oh, we've got such better laws in this country than anywhere else. We should really just fuck all those other places. And he's just using the LGBT issues to try and get his point across, which is Brexit, which is that And then when we look at these posters that we see in London for Tel Aviv Pride. Which is horrible when you think about what's going on in Israel, the different ways that the LGBT struggle is hijacked. It's like, well, I want to be part of this, but I feel like there's so many institutional problems. How can I do that without becoming part of them or validating them? So recently, I'm in a collective called Sorry Feel Uncomfortable, and recently we have been going to museums and doing different performance pieces, kind of decolonising the museum in some ways, and somebody from a collective called Decoloniality London said, really confused about decolonise the museum, how can colonialism be decolonised? And I was like, well, with fire, jokingly, but she's saying, basically the point she's making is that, it's about reforming capitalism. It's like, how can you decolonise something that is so inherently upholding colonialism? Museums, like the British Museum and the Wellcome Collection and the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam, they are just places where white agency is kind of celebrated. It's like, look how we were able to take all these things from other places, look how curious these backwards cultures are, and what, Emily, what she was saying was that, aren't you just validating that struggle, that oppression by being part of it? So that's another thing about the machines of capture. How do you engage with these institutions which are oppressing us without just validating them? Okay, end of psychic death. So the first one is elaborating the event in the light of memory as power and potential. So when we think about the House of Bragg, the London Queer Social Centre, and we think, well, it only lasted 2 weeks, that's not very long. Well, actually, no, it didn't last 2 weeks, because if you look, the last House of Bragg was in Brixton, and look, there's 1974, there's gay activists doing the exact same thing. With the community centre in Brixton, and exactly the same situation, the police standing outside looking shifty, trying to hassle them. And when you think about also the House of Bragg, what was happening in there, there was queer martial arts happening. Is that still happening? Yeah, there's queer and trans boxing happening all the time. There was sex workers giving talks about the laws on sex workers. Is that still happening? Actually, they're putting on an opera. Are people still organising around, all of the different things that happened, all four of the queer social centres are also happening in different ways. They didn't end, The building was just a space where you could view those things. And the idea that like I was only able to access this space for a really short time can be really sad, because I think there's a really great poem called Listening for Survival by Audre Lorde, and one of the lines is saying like those of us who are always loving in doorways. And I think it always makes me think about like how, you know, as queer people, as queer people of colour, as disabled people, working class people, like, you know, all these different people have intersectional oppressions. Often it feels like institutions are not made for you, and they're really not. So, and it feels like there's no space for you, and it can feel really, really like soul destroying, like fuck, like there's nowhere for me really. And then when you can only hang on to spaces for a short amount of time, especially with squatting, I hope I mentioned that it was a squatting social centre, it can be quite sad. It can make you feel like there's no room for change. But actually, these things are still growing all the time and changing. And yeah, this is an image I made of a deity of Orisha from Yoruba, from West Africa. Most people have probably heard of Oshun by now because of Beyonce and because of Tibeye. But there's lots of other Orisha, and this Orisha is called Yewa, and she is the Orisha of decay. And it's a really important power that everybody has, and you know, people think of decay and maggots and rot, and they think of it as a negative thing, but like, decay is just one thing becoming another thing. It's just something else breaking down to become something else, in the same way that, you know, you look at slavery going into the industrial prison complex, going into the industrial military complex, you look at all these different forms of repression that are growing and changing into different things, but so is resistance, and so is different ways that we find to resist. They're constantly breaking down and growing into fresh new things. That's why I included that image. Another way, one of the ways that they say to fight psychic death is no victimization. So sadness only points to our momentary disconnection in a dynamic process which need not be thought about as a long phase of stabilization, periodically interrupted by a crisis of domination, but rather as a process that political struggle goes through. Not only is sadness a politics of power, but also and above all, the circumstance in which the politics of power becomes powerful. So by saying I have no power, you've lost. And you know, I might have a horrible incident of homophobia or racism or police brutality or whatever, but I'm not defined by that. I'm not continually a victim. Like, and I think this is a dodgy one in a sense, because you don't want to like sound like you're saying like victim shaming or victim blaming or any of that stuff. It's like, no, people are victims of things, but people are not defined by that state of victimization, and it's something that can be come out of, and that's really important to remember. So another thing is the power of absentationism. So this is something that I really love, and that's happened. I'm noticing a lot of people just being present, but like not being present, if you know what I mean. So a better example of this is can't really see it, but like the person in the top left corner who was at the Donald Trump rally just reading a book about racism. She was just like, I don't give a shit about this actually. I really don't care. And so in response to the thing about how can you know, so this is Sorry for Uncomfortable Collective on the right, a collective, and like we have jumpers that say token on them. So now when we're invited to a museum or a gallery as like token black artists to like, I don't know, show that they're open to young black people or ethnic minorities, then we turn up wearing token jumpers to be like, you know, we know why we're here. We're being here to make invisible your colonial crackery. We're being here to make it look like you're holding space for black people when really there's no black people who work here. It's just people who come in to do little temporary things and then told to fuck off, basically. So I feel like in the same grain as the thing about absentationism, I think it's important to engage with spaces, but also not necessarily validate them, be like actively there and actively against it. And but also, you know, in a way that I'm not saying that's a solution, because a lot of the time, you know, galleries want to seem like they are critical of themselves, museums want to seem like they are critical of themselves, institutions want to seem like they are critical of themselves. So I'm not saying that that's a solution, that's just one tactic. Another thing that they say that's really important is new public spaces. So that's why I think DIY space is so fucking amazing. That's why I really wanted to come here today, because like having a space, what Collettivo Situazione call concrete politics, I think. yeah, I think they call it concrete politics. I can't find it right now. But like, yeah, concrete politics. Having something that's like physically there and it's not going away. This building has seen so many amazing things since it's opened, and it's in resistance to capitalism in a way because well, I don't know. I guess you have to pay to keep it open. But I feel like a lot of things happen here that are. I mean, the politics of cooperatives. But anyway, it's in resistance to a lot of other spaces in terms of the things that happen. Spaces like open barbers and other institutions are a really important way to fight this kind of thing of psychic death. And then finally, the re-elaboration of the collective. So there's this picture of Sorry for Uncomfortable Collective, and there's loads of collectives in London right now doing really great stuff like Garnet and Voices That Shake and Take Back the City and Lonely Londoners and Collective Creativity and One of My Kind. There's loads of really great collectives doing really interesting stuff, and I think I'll just end with how they describe the re-elaboration of the collective. The collective as a premise and not as a meaning or a point of arrival, like that remainder that emerges from a renewed effort to listen. The collective as a level of political production and as accompanying one another's experiences. We're not talking about group formula of incitement or self-help, it's the opposite. The collective, communitarian, is always a challenge of opening with respect to the world. It is not merely looking outside in terms of a classical topology that would distinguish a communitarian inside and an external outside, but rather the collective as complicity in the adventure of becoming a situational interface with the world. So yeah, like not necessarily, and there was another one as well which I left out I left out a few psychic deaths because I thought there was too many, which was autonomy as a corset, and I think that kind of links into the idea of the collective, of like, that if you have a group of people that are like autonomous from everyone else, then that in a way becomes a bit of a corset and a bit of a restriction, and it's really good that, these collectives are not like little clubs of people. Often they're like no sorry for uncomfortable. It's groups of people who are really open to discussion with other people and open to working with other people and open to like collaborating and growing. It's not like this is our little clique. It's people who are just interested in working with other people. So collective in the broadest sense of the word. Anyway, that's what I have to say. So thanks for listening, and yeah, happy to talk to anyone. The token jumper. I am gonna start to make some because I haven't got any money to make them, but I will message you, and maybe DIY Space might even like publicise it a bit. I don't know. So in case you guys want to hear about it and you don't take my details. But they were like a rush job. We really wanted to do this project at the Welcome Collection, but we knew that we were being used to validate them, so we had to get 16 jumpers printed in a week. And it was really expensive, but I'm going to get some made properly, and it'll take a bit longer.
What was the response to that interest?
Well, so the reason why they invited us to play a game, and what we did was the collective each chose, I think, 6 items. We chose 54 items in total, and we each from the Welcome Collection. And we researched them, and it really didn't take much research at all to find counter-narratives, to find, it would be like, oh, this mask from Alaska represents a man eating a seal, and then you look into it and it's actually a piece of art made by Haida and Tlingit tribes, and it's represents this kind of colonial resistance, and actually those people they didn't go away. Those people, they're still in Alaska, they're still fighting colonialism, they're still doing all the shit. So we chose items, and then we wrote descriptions of them that were counter, and some of them were poetic, some of them were more critical, and then we illustrated them 54 items and played bingo. So you came into the gallery and then you get a bingo scorecard at the museum, and it's got 16 images on it. And then we have all these amazing prizes, and to win prizes you have to get a bingo, but to get bingo you have to hear the description, which is often quite uncomfortable, of the object. So they invited us to play a game, and we just dragged their whole institution and their collection, and yeah, it didn't seem too complicated. No one from the Welcome Collection said anything about the token jumpers. They were just eyes darted down and darted up. It was kind of I don't know. There was definitely no.
So there was no like serious, or there was no like institutional response to your provocation in a sense. They just kind of allowed it to happen, and then it was over.
Yeah, I don't think they would have told us to take off. Yeah, they did. They were just we didn't put them on until there was loads of things happening on that night in the welcome collection, and that was in the medicine man room with all the oddities.
Mm-hmm.
So we took up that space for the evening, and I think the organisers were going around making sure other things were happening at other things in the museum, and they came back and we were all wearing these jumpers, and I don't think. I mean, hopefully it made them think more critically about the collection, because like not the institution itself, but the people who work there definitely they're just not trained that well. They're not made to think much about colonialism and stuff. So I don't know. It really is that question that person Jade said. Is there any point like in even engaging? There is, I would say, but I think it's there was no kind of like, oh shit, there's something I missed out, which is about victories. Yes, it's really important not to think about things in terms of victories or losses. And I think that one of the ways that political sadness operates is to make us think of things of like we've either won or we've lost. And actually, any kind of like feminism, queerness, decoloniality, they're all and racism, sexism, patriarchy, they're all isms, they're all systems, so they don't have an end. So I think sometimes it can be really like you really want some kind of like as you say, like a reaction or some kind of like you've made us learn this and we'll change our ways, and from now on no more racism in this museum, or I don't know, but that just never happens, and it can be it's really hard not, because of the way that our societies give, it's really hard not to want that and want there to be some kind of conclusive, tangible result. But I feel like they're all systems that are going on. So there was no slap on the wrist or well done from the welcome, but we haven't been invited back, so I don't think.
I think sometimes sometimes you present a good reaction, but they just like still absorb.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe like years later it'll click. Do you know what I mean, or something, or like
Definitely, I think that's how I engage with stuff. But wasn't there someone else who's on right after me? So I'm worried that I'm...
Yeah, but if there's anybody wants to sort of discuss things further with Jacob, then we can go for 5 or 10 minutes more if you want to. But if not, then we can move on.
Well, I would ask if anyone has any resistance strategies to psychic death, or like the feeling, the feeling sometimes where you feel like I just can't change anything, there's no point. Does anyone have any kind of, and literally I'm asking because I need them.
join the union.
In the union?
Join the union.
Okay, well I'm self-employed, so...
You join the artist union.
Okay.
Talk to me about it. Or anybody else.
Cool, that sounds good.
But I'll talk about it in a minute, so.
Oh, and I also forgot to say something, which is what I was going to say when I was talking about Pride, is that there's a queer picnic happening. I don't know, some of you might have heard about it. So, this year, Pride, the Trade Union Congress have pulled out from Pride. They've said, like, fuck Pride, it's just to celebrate, the army, the Tories, Barclays, they have nothing to do with LGBT struggles. The gay pride was originally a protest, and now it's just a fucking joke. And I'm not saying that it's not empowering for loads of people, and I'm really happy that those people are empowered, but I think it's also good that other things are happening. I know that Sisters Uncut are organising against Pride this year. The queer picnic's happening in Lambeth, and that's going to be amazing, and you should come to that. And also Surtuck have pulled out, so yeah, lots of people are doing things, and that's great if you don't want to go to Pride.
What date is the queer picnic?
The same day as Pride, which is like the 20th.
23rd? Is it 23rd?
I think so. Or yeah, but the same time, exactly the same time that Pride is happening in central London. Come to Burgess Park and have a picnic.
What is the name of your collective again, and are you doing any events over the summer specifically with the collective?
Yeah, so the collective is called Sorry Feel Uncomfortable, and we are doing a few things. We're doing a workshop at the ICA, which we're not really sure what it's about yet, but it'll be good. And I don't know when that is, but it's next month. But more concretely than that, and more local, we're doing some workshops in collaboration with the Women's Archive at Goldsmiths Library, specifically responding to a project called X Marks the Spot, which was a catalogue of black women artists in the UK, like just a massive catalogue, and we are using that as our research material and putting on a series of 5 workshops, and kind of exploring the archive and different themes like intimacy and music and other things. But that will definitely, if you can follow Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable, which is SYFU Collective on Twitter, SYFU Collective, and then we're on Facebook as well. And it's lots of really great people. And that's another thing about the whole the thing of the going back to the first one, the logic of specialists. You know, everyone in Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable. You know, Deborah has got a background in film, and he's fine art. Brabs is music. Imani is anthropology, I think, and Azuki is also art. So, and there's people who've got geography backgrounds, English backgrounds, you know. So I think that's what I think is the strength of the collective, is that we're not all artists, although we're all doing creative things. Because I think that things become quite stagnant if you're not like. And that's the thing. So Sorry Feel Uncomfortable. We're called Sorry Feel Uncomfortable because all the work we realised we were doing was making people feel uncomfortable, because we were all talking about colonialism, race, gender, and we're all predominantly people of colour. So it's kind of like. People would say, why are you making it about race? Why are you making it about race? And it's like, well, actually, if you're talking about film, if you're talking about music, if you're talking about geography, if you're talking about English, if you're talking about anthropology, sociology, whatever, you should make it about race, actually. Well, maybe not, you shouldn't make it about race, but there's a discussion to be had. So there's lots of really interesting things happening from other people. I definitely think it's worth checking the collective out. Yeah, and also, on a side note, the zine I mentioned, Fear Brown Queers, I have some copies as well, so if anyone wants to buy them, I'll be shamelessly self-promoting at the bar.
I'm not quite just formulating, but I was thinking it's about psychic deaths.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a link, also as I get older, I feel like I've sort of noticed, I've been thinking I was sort of turned 30 recently, I've been thinking a lot about how people seem to drop out of activists or queer, kind of radical scenes and things like that. I'm not sure what I'm asking really, but I'm just sort of saying that I've noticed that that can seem a bit depressing. It's what is it that people are, something happens at a certain age, it's a factor of mixture of things, do you know what I mean? But is it because we get disillusioned with things have changed and things like that?
I think it's having less time. The older I get, the less time I have, and the more you have to work to survive, and the less it just takes it out of you. You're just always so tired. I just don't understand how, this is doing 9 to 5 and stuff. It's just, you just want to relax on the weekend. You don't want to think about politics or oppression. You have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis in your job. So it just seems so hard to but I think spaces like this where people can socialise and meet other people and have fun, while at the same time engaging in critical discourses and challenging stigmas and oppressions and all these different things are so crucial, and all of the other the different things. So yeah, I the reason why I wanted to do that, I did the talk on the political sadness, is because I had to read it 4 times to understand it. I really struggle with academic writing, but I also think that there's a place for it, and it's important. So I would recommend other people having a go with it, really, because I definitely will have coloured it in my own set of colours, and I think it is useful in terms of resistance and thinking about things you're saying, because it does seem like it's just a fact of life that the older you get, the harder it becomes to engage. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that, or resistance strategies.
I find academic language quite I took a long time out between school and uni, and I've just come back from high school for years. But I find academic language really accessible, but I realise that that's because it's written for me as a cis white man. Do you think, could Could you elaborate on academic
Yeah,
language
well-
being useful?
Yeah, so I think I read something somewhere recently was saying that like if you want to see how language was 100 years, like talk to a white middle class man and who's middle aged, and if you want to see how English language was like 100 years ago, or like the first point, but if you want to see how the language is like will be in the future, or how it's changed, whereas talk to like a young black woman, like or like a teenage black girl, or like, and I think that also is like femme and queer and trans black people as well. And like when I think about language and I think about the way that I spoke at school and the way that I still speak sometimes in certain places, like it's a totally different language. It's a completely different language. And you know, I'm doing a biopolitics course at the moment for some stupid reason. And literally listening to the teacher talk makes me feel like I'm being slapped in the head. Like I just can't understand what she's saying. I just can't. I've recorded the lectures and I play them back. I'm just like, what are you saying? What are you talking about? But she's speaking English. Like it's just very dense academic like way of talking that I've never been around in my life, and I've never. I find it like really, it's like a different language. So I think that that there will be like people of colour who've gone to private school or whose parents have afforded tuition, or like have become accustomed to like academic writing or speaking in words that just aren't commonplace in day-to-day conversation. And then there's other languages. And that's why I fucking love Tumblr and Twitter and all these places where people are just using their own language, you know, like their own colloquialisms or like terminologies and slang to talk about quite political concepts, like and in a way that's just as woke, just as important, and just as like yeah. So I think that's why, and that is 100% why I decided to go back into academia, because I was working in youth centres, I'm still working in youth centres, and I think that all the concepts in terms of politics, like I really want to make it accessible, and that's why I made the zine White Boys as well, because I think like satire and comics and illustrations can be a really good way to like make it digestible. But yeah, I do think you're 100% right, and I didn't think of it that way before, but it is it has been written for a specific type of audience who speaks a certain type of language, and the younger that you become accustomed to that language, the easier it's going to be to speak it. But let's just hope that, like, I don't know, Sadiq Khan just turns it into Londonistan really quickly and appoints loads of like young black femme queer like ministers, and then white middle class people are like, I don't know what they're saying. I can't understand it. And the tables will turn.
It's the Black Museum in Brixton. Are you positive about that?
Yeah, I am. I think it's really amazing and important, but I think that because it's in Brixton and the rent that they have to pay, unfortunately they have to charge quite a lot for events there. And I think that's a real shame. But I do think there's ways around it. I think people should apply for Arts Council funding to do things there, which is what I was in the process of doing with a group of people. And it's a good space. It's a good space, and I'm really. I remember the day that opened being so happy, but it's quite expensive to go to events there, which is a shame, because that's the reason why most people are moving out of Brixton, because it's become too expensive. So it's like, oh wait, here's a museum of black stuff. It's like you can't afford it.
Okay, I think we're going to have to move on, unfortunately. So, yeah, thank you so much, Jacob.